I'm Evelyn Culp, interviewing her.
Welcome to Evie's History Bites, hosted by Martha Owen, the Heritage Collection Manager of the ELC Heritage Collection. Welcome to another episode of Evie's History Bites. I'm Martha, your host, and I have a very amazing episode this month. I sat down with my great friend Brian Bryn from the Midwest Museum of American Art to talk about Emma Schrock. Let's dive into our conversation. Thank you so much, Brian, for sitting down with me and letting me come up here to the Midwest Museum of American Art. I always love it up here. People don't really know that I took art classes here when I was a kid in the basement. So that's a lot of fun.
That makes me feel really old, Martha. Nonetheless, yes, those were very launching pad for a lot of young artists, and we hope that at the very least would become future curators, maybe, and certainly patrons of the arts. So.
Yeah. So why don't you just tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, well, I am soon to be retired after 43 and a half years. I think today or tomorrow is close to my 43.5, and I'm supposed to be retiring, and it will be 44 years. I came to Elkhart in 1981, just out of Indiana University, with a degree from the Southeast Campus, which is located in New Albany. So historically, and I know this is historic podcast, I was born in Corydon, Indiana, which is the historic first state capital. So as a child, I grew up around all of these architectural features: the first state capitol, the first governor's mansion, the first treasurer's mansion, the Posey House. We were very close. Harrison County is very close and runs adjacent to Crawford County. So there's Wyandotte Caves, Marengo Cave, and of course in Harrison County, Squire Boone Cave. So the history of the early part of the state was all founded right there, just a little north of the Ohio River. So realizing that as a child, I played on the Constitutional Elm. My dad worked pretty close by there. And all of those things were just a part of the fabric of growing up in a little town of about 2,700 people. So Napanee would be a metropolis by comparison.
Yeah.
So I came up here and hoping to be a struggling, starving artist, but with a lot of skill sets, survival sets. And my goal was to eventually move to Chicago. But Elkhart had this fabulous museum, and I walked in it during the summer of 1981, and I was astounded by what I saw in the main gallery, which was a national traveling show of the artist Miriam Shapiro. Now, she's a major art historically important artist, no longer living, but one of the pattern and decoration artists, an early feminist artist. She was hosted by Goshen College some years ago as an Eric Carnegie Fellowship speaker. So to see that in downtown Elkhart, and let's face it, I had not been north of Indianapolis since my 18th birthday when I started at Butler University and doubled back, but finished my degree at Southeast in 81. It was phenomenal, and downtown Elkhart did not look as good as it does today. So that's sort of my origin story, and I met Jane Burns, and I won Best of Show as an artist in the 3rd Elkhart Jury Regional. She brought me in, she and the late Dr. Richard Burns, the two founders of the museum, and hired me, and I started November 15th, 1981.
Oh, wow.
So that's my origin story right there.
So what is the Midwest Museum of Art, and what is your role?
Well, we're certainly focused on American. That's in our title, the Midwest Museum of American Art. And that agenda was cast by our founders, the late Dr. Richard D. and Jane Burns. And my initial role was curator of exhibitions and education. It was to replace or cover the job of two curators who had moved on in their careers to other gameful situations. And I remained at that post as curator of exhibitions and education up until I finished a master's in 1996, and then my title shifted to curator. And during my tenure here, it has been about building the collection, building relationships with artists, with collectors, with galleries. When I say galleries, I mean commercial galleries, but certainly museum colleagues across the Midwest, if not in the directly Michiana region. And in so doing all and creating a docent program and developing that docent program, I just, you had to wear a lot of hats and do a lot of things.
Yeah.
But my main focus and my joy was, arranging for traveling and temporary exhibits, developing the collection, which is very deep. So, for example, when I showed up in 1981, there were 224 works in the permanent collection, some of which were early Emma Schrock paintings. And I knew nothing about Emma Schrock, and I've kind of dug into that since. And I have a little bit more information we'll impart. But today, 6,800 works. So
oh, wow.
The depth of the Evelyn Lehman Culp Heritage Collection, how many objects you have to touch, and make sure you account for. And so with works of art, they come in a variety of media and a variety of size, scale, etc. So all along my 40 years, I've never lost sight of continuing to provide good stewardship of all those works of art.
Yeah, and I think my most favorite collection that you guys have is the Norman Rockwell collection. Every single time that I come here, I try and make sure that it's on display.
Yes, it is. It is on display 10 months of the year because there's one moment there at the end of our calendar year that we mount the huge Elkhart Juried Regional, which I spoke of. As a young artist, that was my first professional show. Winning Best of Show was huge. And then it was only 10 counties. Today it's 24 counties. So we have hundreds of artists, hundreds of works of art coming to us directly, and we have to manage each and every object. So we take the Rockwells down just for 2 months, and when they return, let's say mid-January, and they're up until this year, till the end of September.
Okay.
There are 50 on display, and I've enhanced that collection of colotypes and lithographs, all signed and numbered. So they're a limited edition type of print. And when I say print, a colotype in the early years was a type of reproduction that Rockwell engaged with. It just wasn't like he needed any more money. He was rich beyond compare to most artists in America. But it was a way to disseminate his career because he no longer had the vehicle, the front cover of a Saturday Evening Post or a Country Gentleman or a Look magazine, Saturday Evening Post being the primary. So these have been collected over the years, and to date we own 68. We have 50 on display during our peak season, certainly of tourism. And I've added to that some really important examples of sculpture groupings by John Rogers.
Okay.
And Norman Rockwell said in one of his 3 books, his biography, said that when he was young, the figure groupings of John Rogers so entranced him, so inspired him that he knew he wanted to become an illustrator. And the other inspirator of that early phase of Rockwell's career was one J.C. Leyendecker. And Joseph Christian Leyendecker was a rock star of illustration. And Rockwell literally followed him around and watched how he dressed, where he ate, how he comported himself like a celebrity, and tried to model his career. So much so that he moved to New Rochelle to be in this enclave of famous rock star illustrators. We're talking about anywhere from 1890 to 1930, in the golden age of American illustration. And Leyendecker was like a neighbor, but lived in a much more palatial mansion.
Mm-hmm.
And he brought Joe over for dinner and said to Joe Leyendecker, "What's the secret of your success?" And Joe Leyendecker, without blinking, looked at him and said, "Well, Norman, you have to spend more than you make and live beyond your means. You have to live a lavish lifestyle because that will drive you to your studio to keep pace with what you spend."
Uh-huh.
Unfortunately, Joe Leyendecker passed away as a pauper. And we have a wonderful original painting by J.C. Leyendecker that was a Saturday Evening Post cover in 1913. It now hangs in the Norman Rockwell collection. So when you come to see Rockwell, you're seeing the largest collection of its type in America.
Yeah.
And you're also seeing these peripheral important influences that gave Rockwell direction.
Okay. Yeah, that's really cool. And like I said, it's always my favorite to come and see because I know like 9 times out of 10 it's going to be on exhibit when I'm here.
Yes.
So we're going to switch gears a little bit and talk about a local artist, one that we both have collections of her work. So who was Emma Schrock?
Well, to me, she was, an unknown until I kind of got into the files here, into my first 2 or 3 years as curator, learning what had happened just before and trying to help plan what would happen afterwards. So my knowledge of Emma was that she was an old order Mennonite, so not Amish, and I had to learn all of these situations, cultural changes. And lo and behold, in 1979 or early 1980, I can't remember now, the museum hosted an exhibit of her work. So she must have so intrigued the first staff, first director, and curators that they mounted this show. And I do know that some of that impetus came from then Congressman John Bradamus, who would buy her work. They were very reasonable, and buy her work and give them as gifts from his district to dignitaries, other politicians, whatever, in Washington. When I arrived and I looked in the file, it said her show was a sellout. And there was a lot of little red dots indicating that pieces were sold, but the prices were like $5 and $15, and I don't even think it broached $25. I think it was $5, $15, $20, maybe in 10. And so the museum acquired 3 pieces immediately, and that became the core of our collection and the beginning of my interest to learn more about Emma Schrock. I will say, sadly, I never got to meet her before she passed away. But I was at the estate sale that the bank, Salem Bank in Goshen, held, and I was asked to come over and take a look at these things, and I said, well, what's my role in this? And they said, well, we need to understand value. And I said, well, I cannot do an appraisal because of my conflict of interest working for this public foundation, or public museum rather, and so, but I went over curiously to look, and there wasn't a whole lot of. There were some pieces that were not finished. There was frames. There was note cards. I didn't see a lot of finished work. Now in my memory, I can't remember if there was even one painting. But people literally lined up around the block.
Oh my goodness.
And in a matter of less than a half an hour, everything there was sold.
Wow.
And my then wife worked in the trust department at Salem Bank. And I think George Stump was the head of that at that time. And maybe Doug Grant would know more about the banking part of that, but they were tasked with the disposal of whatever was left.
Yeah.
So that was a little bit fast forward into my future learning about Emma. And of course, as we acquired more works in the collection, we decided we meaning our collective we, Jane Burns and myself, thought, well, it's important now we know more people who know Emma. We knew where more works of art were, so we created an exhibit.
Mm-hmm.
And boy, did a lot of people turn out to share stories then.
Yeah. So, you said you had a couple of Emma's programs in the early 2000s. So can you talk about those and people sharing their stories?
Yes, well, it was really great because we do a weekly gallery talk. I've been doing that for probably almost 40 years of my tenure, and it was one way to engage people on their noon hour when downtown Elkhart was a thriving business community. And in doing that and having this exhibition and meeting Doug Grant and seeing his collection, which was largest I had ever seen, we thought, oh gosh, we've heard so many stories that we'll devote a couple of our noontime talks to remembering Emma.
Mm-hmm.
And in so doing, and of course the museum then did not have a lot of ways to advertise or get the word out, so a lot of it went through word of mouth and through our membership, which turned out that our members, there were several key members who had met Emma and been to her home and bought these from her and felt really a kindred spirit to her. And so when we did these two talks, on these 2 Thursdays, people came literally from out of the woodwork, including a brother of Emma Schrock, who said it, and we recorded these on an old VHS tape system, and the brother said, well, he'd made all the frames for Emma. And that was kind of a revelation. But I think the biggest revelation came when an artist whom we knew from Chesterton named Mary Stepanovich came out of the woodwork. And, well, we had known she and her 2 daughters, 2 of them, Mary and Deb Stepanovich, artists, and Michelle was in radio programming for the high school there in Chesterton, I guess it is. Well, Mary showed up and told this story. First, she told it to Jane Burns and I privately. We said, well, we need to have you on record. We need to have you come to the sharing, Remembering Emma series. And so she retold it just as she told it first to us, and it was like this. In the early years of Dick Pletcher's now famous Amish Acres Art Festival. It was the Pletcher Village Art Festival. It was held in downtown Napanee. And I guess in a modest way, people set out card tables and everything has to have a start somewhere and it grows and develops from there. Mm-hmm. And so Mary was a toll painter. So it's a type of decorative painting, and she painted teapots and cups and tinware and things. And so she, and I don't know that Deb had to be a lot younger then. I don't know if her daughter Deb was showing, but Mary and her husband drove down and participated and did pretty well selling these kind of country toll painting objects. And the table literally next to hers was this little, small, what she thought was an Amish lady, and she come to learn who Emma Schrock was, and they kind of hit it off. And so Emma, being very entrepreneurial, I would say it's early networking, Mary and her husband would give her a ride back to her home near Wakarusa. And so one year, and so Emma looked at Mary's work and said, how do you get your paint to dry so fast? Because I guess Mary did some demonstration on site painting these things. And she said, well, this is something called acrylic paint, and it's not oil-based. And so Emma had been painting using oils and realized that there was a drying time, and she was just really fascinated. So Mary introduced, according to Mary, to Emma to the idea of using acrylic so that her paintings could dry faster, and she could make more of them. And she never was like a machine and created volumes of them, but she did create the same titles over and over, and sometimes she got to where she was creating stock sizes, you know, of stock canvas panels. I guess she had been painting on other surfaces like wood and china plates, white plates she bought from the dime store. Is that right?
Yeah.
And so anyway, so Mary Stepanovich took credit for introducing Emma Schrock to acrylic painting, and then they just became friends. And all the years that Mary continued the association with the Pletcher Village Art Fair, as it turned into the Amish Acres, she would come down and pick Emma up and take her home and help her and sort of guide her. And so this also came up, I believe, in the story years later. Emma said something about, well, someone is reproducing my paintings, and I didn't give permission to do that. And I think it was Mary, and maybe she had talked to some other too, about putting a C with a circle around it like a copyright symbol next to your name, and that could stop that kind of activity from happening. So there is something there, and you may have dove deeper into this, but somewhere, our initial paintings do not have that copyright. Somewhere around 82 or 83.
Yeah, I want to say like in the early 80s, probably around like 83, 84, something like that. Yeah.
You start to see that copyright symbol, don't you, appear next to her name. And I've been told by some really true collectors, and of course her works are now been disseminated all over the country.
Yeah.
I've had people call me from California, from Arizona, from down in Georgia, and from a lady in Spain contacted me who had, who was living there part-time but from another state. And it's kind of amazing. So Shipshewana became the hub of her disseminating her work out into the world. And so collectors, I always ask, well, does it have, what year is it? Because sometimes she dated them the month, the day, and the year, and then it just became the year and maybe her signature and a copyright. So really collectors are always looking for those early works.
Yeah.
So I had a gentleman, and I don't know when she actually started dating, but I have one piece in our collection that does have a clear date of 1965 on it. And this came from a local auto dealer, used auto dealer, who had bought 5 of them to hang in his office. And as he got older and near the completion of his final revolution on this earth, said, well, I want to give these to the museum. And they were pretty unique and early, but only one of them had a date. It was either 64 or 65.
I want to say our earliest one is like 65.
Yes.
I think so.
I think then that's probably the age. So somewhere along the line, she decided, maybe from looking at the artists around her, that she needs to put a date on them.
Yeah. So why don't you just tell us a little bit about your collection of Emmas that you have here at the Midwest Museum of American Art?
Yes, well, it's a great collection, and it's been put together piecemeal, primarily through donations. Now, the first 3 were purchased for just very little money, and the museum had really no acquisition fund in those first 3, 4, even 4 decades. But we found donors, and we also found a couple came from out of Chicago, and they had these 3 very unique Emma Schrock paintings. Not the typical Amish scene, Amish farm scene or buggy. One was the hardware store in downtown New Paris with Amish buggies pulled up to the hitching rail. And the other 2 I can't quite remember, but that one stuck out in my mind. And we had a charter docent named Jane Grimes, And Jane and her husband, Don Grimes, had both been teachers, and she was a charter docent here and just a favored personality of ours. And she said, well, I will give you the money to buy those pieces for the museum's collection. And so on the spot, we sort of negotiated. Well, I don't know how we arranged for this couple called, and then they were coming through Elkhart on their way east, brought these 3 paintings. Jane Burns, myself, and Jane Grimes met them and looked at them, and basically it came down to, well, what do you want for them? And the details are a little sketchy now in my memory, but I'm sure I have something on file that will relate it specific value. But let's say for all practical purposes it came to about $600 for the 3 paintings, all of which looked unique to us. And we thought, oh yeah, these are special. I've never seen anything like these. And they were clearly Emma Schrock's, and this was too early in the whole idea of anybody ever trying to fake or imitate or pass something off as a copy. So we felt secure, and the older couple thought they'd hit the jackpot, and well, I guess they went right to the bank, cashed the check, and rolled on east, and never to be heard of again. But I do have name and information on file. So that was a unique situation. So then we set out, when someone offered something, we set out to decide, well, we would take almost any Emma Schrock unless it was offset lithograph reproduction or a note card frame to pretend to be a small.
Yeah.
We had enough knowledge. I had gained enough knowledge from talking to collectors to figure things out. And so to date, I think we are hovering somewhere around 30 works in our collection. And I did take different sizes. If we had one version of airing the quilts, because she wasn't a machine, but I had some collectors say, oh, well, we visited with Emma and she had several paintings lined up she was working on for the English to sell. And, she was doing, and there were 3 or 4 airing the quilts, but she changed little details, as I understand it.
Yeah.
Do you think that's true?
I think that's true, because I talked to a lady, and this is crazy because, with our collection, we have so many people who come and share their Emma stories with us, or show us pictures of their paintings, and I forget what the painting is called, but Emma was working on 2 of these paintings, and a couple from California stopped in and wanted to buy one of them, and she had been working on this painting for this woman's husband, and so she asked her brother to pick out which one was the best. And so her brother picked out the best one, and then she sold the other one to the couple from California. And the painting that she kept, she actually changed it, and she put a little Amish boy in a tractor tire rolling down the barn hill of this different one. And it's completely crazy because in the same week or the week after this lady told us about this painting, that painting actually hit the market. That, not her painting, but the other painting that she was telling us about hit the market. And I think they want like $4,500 for it.
Wow.
But it was completely crazy that it hit the market like not even like a week after, and I was like, oh, that's not the good one.
And Emma seemed to be very astute at in her later years about business and about selling, and I think she had some lessons learned early on how to comport herself as a business person and meet the public too, right there at Pletcher Village and maybe later Amish Acres.
Yeah.
Do you think that her market is still pretty strong today? It seems to be to me.
Oh, yeah, I think that it's still huge. it's very rare to find her paintings hitting the market and that they're for sale. And if they are for sale, if they're a reasonable price, they like go rather quickly.
And I've been asked, well, what is the range? And I said, well, I'm not an art dealer and not that tuned into the retail markets, but I know locally, I think people have started out paying very little.
Yeah.
And then, wherever they ended up with family members, or there's a huge, big barn-raising painting in the Lerner Public Art Collection that I was helped to instrument to get that there. And the late Mr. Robert A. Peterson, former president of the Elkhart Products, came to me and said, I want to donate this in honor of my late wife and also to honor Emma Schrock, because I guess he'd had personal contact with her. So she invited people to visit her.
Yeah.
And people have stories about, well, I went down and paid, and no one ever said that they thought whatever they paid was unreasonable.
Yeah.
But I think today it could go from, the low hundreds into, mid thousands, depending on what it is. If it's rare or if it's large. Apparently, do you know of many large paintings?
So I've been told that there was only 3 large paintings. So
wow.
The Lerner has one, we have one, and then we are being gifted the 3rd one once Mr. Grant sees fit that it is time to gift us that 3rd one.
So Doug Grant has held on to his large.
Yeah. So we
Yes.
still have, so our Doug Grant Family Gallery tops out about 60 Emmas. There are 6 Emmas of that collection that we don't have yet. So we are preparing
that's right. I
to
remember.
receive those 6.
And I just calculated here, Martha, and we have 29.
Okay.
So we're looking for that number 30. But I know where 6 more are, and I'm not going to tell you where they are. No,
Okay. No, that's
kidding.
perfectly fine.
I mean, how many pieces do you think Emma Schrock made in her life?
I don't know. We always tell people that it's over 2,000. And I think our Doug Grant collection is probably one of the, if not the largest, privately owned collection.
Oh, I do.
Of Emma's, from the uniqueness of the large paintings to the smaller paintings to the ones that we have painted on wood and things like that. We have probably about 4 wood pieces, I want to say.
Those were unique to me until I saw a few during that first initial exhibit.
Yeah.
That's amazing. You do have, I believe, the largest public collection that I know of, until someone else steps forward and says, well, we have 100 here in the barn.
Oh, yeah. We've had people come to us and they're like, we have 20 Emma Schrocks. Would you like to buy them? And we're like, no, thank you. we think that we have enough Emmas. I mean, with our Doug Grant collection, and then with our collection of our own, we're looking at a little bit over 80 paintings.
Yeah, that's amazing.
And we're working on we're working with 2 other people to figure out, actually 3, because there's currently an Emma Schrock painting sitting on my desk waiting for me to figure out if we want it or not. So we were working with 3 different families and groups to acquire more.
Fantastic. Well, I'd say between the 2 institutions, the Midwest Museum of American Art and the Evan Lehman Culp Heritage Collection, we have the best sampling of her legacy.
Yeah, I think so too. And we hide Emmas everywhere and anywhere that we can. that we've picked up that are unique. Like our one, because I found out that Emma originally wanted to paint landscapings, and the landscapings wouldn't sell. There's actually one there's been a couple of this similar painting that I wish that we could acquire, but we haven't been able to find it, or even it hasn't hit the auction market. Again, it is called the Narrows, and it was this gorgeous lake with trees and things like that. I think there's even a mountain in it.
Wow.
And so
she obviously looked at other sources and was probably inspired by things that people gave her or brought to her, greeting cards or things in National Geographic. Maybe, I don't know, but
yeah, and
but she was a folk artist, so as a folk artist, she made art for applause and to sell, to keep her family moving forward economically. So I think that's a point that people need to understand about her, and what motivated her. Now, some would argue that how naive, if naive is also folk or outsider, there's a lot of terms, and some people like some over others. But folk artist is a pretty, generic way to describe her. But they play for applause. They work with what they have, like Grandma Moses did. She worked on her kitchen table, and if she needed a little glitter in the snow, she reached over and gathered up a spoonful of sugar or salt and sprinkled it on the wet paint. That's a fact. And I think for Emma, she became very astute at how to sell her work. She had one marketing hub, it seemed like, in Shipshewana. But some would argue, well, how naive can you be after a point when that evil money enters the picture,
Yeah.
I don't know. Did you run across anything like that? Because now people are trying to sell you. I wanted to say, when people Google or look her up, oftentimes the Midwest Museum of American Art jumps right up there, depending on how you're set up on your computer. But we did a second exhibit years later. So we've, I think, done a total of 3 exhibitions, and one of them was larger and borrowed, and one of them was smaller and focused on Mr. Grant's collection and what the museum then had acquired to date. And so that information still pops up when people, and I will get, every once in a while, as I'm sure you do too, a call from some far-flung place. I had one lady who was in Spain. Well, I'm in Spain, but I'm from Georgia, and I just inherited this. And so it's amazing to me where these Emma Schrock paintings are. But all roads lead back to Elkhart County.
Yeah.
She was the Grandma Moses of Elkhart County, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, and that's what we tell people all the time, and I think that's the tagline that we use the most for her, is either the Grandma Moses of Elkhart County or even the Grandma Moses of Northern Indiana. And we've really come across other artists very similar to her, like Maud Lewis, who is in Nova Scotia, Canada. And then there's also one in Virginia, I think that lived in Virginia. I can't think of her name off of the top of my head, but they're very similar to Emma. And I mean, Maud Lewis even had similar physical disabilities. That's the same as Emma.
Yes. Yeah, we didn't really talk about that, but I guess she was granted permission by her church too, because she could not marry and thus bear children. That was the story I remember. And so she had to have some means of income.
Yeah.
And so she was granted permission to make pictures and I guess sell them to the English, if that's what they referred to people as. And so there was a quest there, I think, a real concern to to be innovative and be creative and to make a living.
Yeah. And I think back to when you were talking about when she started, like, the different dates and the copywriting and things like that. I think that's really, in the early 80s, I think that's really where her paintings took a turn. Mm-hmm. And you could tell that she had acquired that cult-like following and was, like, really rushed to produce art. Making, like, her, you know, her paintings from, like, the 60s and the 70s, probably, like, the most authentic. Mm-hmm. To being, like, a folk art in that way.
Yes, I think you're right about that too. And you know, that therein again lay the old devil in the deep blue sea. The, you know, how do I make a living and still be authentic?
Yeah.
And be true to myself. And I would think that would be something that Old Order Mennonite, Amish, whatever, however you want to cast that, from a religious perspective, would want to be as authentic and be as true to form as possible. Mm-hmm. And so I don't know if she had any real internal struggles with that, or there's no stories ever emerged about that, but I know that she was always friendly. She always welcomed people into her home, mm-hmm. and everybody that went there intentionally left with something.
Yeah.
I mean, so she must have been a pretty good saleswoman too.
She must have been. And, like, you know, you were talking about Grandma Moses, like, needing sugar for her paintings, so she would put sugar. I mean, Emma used puff paint. We have paintings with puff paint and glitter in them.
Yes.
Our triptych, which you passed over, which is now ours, it has that puff paint in, I think, every single painting. There's that pink glitter puff paint.
Yes. As I recall, that was a commission piece for a funeral home. Uh-huh. And I don't know if it was a couple at the time, but whoever approached us, we did not have the money, but Mr. Grant stepped up because he had become a patron, donating the Overbeck collection, which is the largest in the world. Mm-hmm. We have on display 52 weeks a year. He stepped up and purchased that. So that was another really kind of unusual find. It just, there it was, you know, and someone wanted to, they didn't know how to manage to sell it, but they knew they wanted to sell it, not donate it. That was the other thing, I think, too. So that's a great piece in your collection, thanks to Doug Grant. So.
Yeah. And really spending a lot of time with her collection, I've made some observations. Obviously, her family has told us about Skippy the dog. I don't know if you know about Skippy the dog.
No, I don't. Tell me about that.
Skippy is this black and white dog who appears in many of her paintings. In our Doug Grant collection, he appears 11 times.
Oh.
So, you know, I was just wondering, do you think that there's a possibility that she could have painted herself into her paintings as, like, one of the many, like, people that she's painted throughout her paintings, like in the auction or, you know, in the school scenes, things like that?
I can't recall that specifically out of the commentary. I'd have to go back and review that tape or that disc now that, to find that out if people suggested that. But I don't think it's beyond reason that she might have.
Yeah, and that's just some observations that I've made, because I've noticed multiple times in her paintings that she paints in this little girl in a pink dress. And I know that pink was her favorite color. So, like, and usually there's only one little girl in a pink dress. So that's sometimes where I was like, is that Emma putting herself in her paintings? Like, you know, but knowing the Old Order Mennonite community, it's like, it's almost like, did she not? Like, where is that line?
But her face would have been obscured or turned in a bonnet so that you couldn't see the face directly. Yeah, well, that's part of the now myth until we can prove otherwise. Well, that's great. That's a good storyline. Is the little girl in a pink dress Emma Schrock? and
Yeah.
could very likely be, I would say.
Mm-hmm.
Great observations.
Yeah. So you did talk about the Overbeck collection. So I know we both have connections with Mr. Grant because he is a great man. He is a great giver. So can you just tell us a little bit about the Overbeck collection?
Oh, yes. Well, in brief, the Overbecks were actually 6 sisters, and there was a brother. They came from a Quaker agrarian background, but yet Mother Overbeck saw that all of her daughters were prepared for life and valued education, so at least 4 of the 6 received some kind of collegiate training beyond, the rudiments of one-room schools and high schools.
Mm-hmm.
And so, in so doing, Margaret Overbeck became a professor teaching at DePaul University. And so she convinced, after she returned to Cambridge City, Indiana, where they all lived, she convinced 3 of the sisters that they needed to band together and form what now is recognized as the first arts and craft pottery in the state of Indiana.
Mm-hmm.
And they had received notoriety from china plate patterns that they had developed and won awards for back east, and had been published in magazines. Magazines were the early television and before radio. That was where you got all of your information, where you connected with people. And so they were recognized that way. But they lived in this little town in Cambridge City, Indiana. So if you're looking at the map and you see Indianapolis in the center and you went due east, you'd run into Richmond.
Mm-hmm.
There in Wayne County. And that's where the National Road came through. And also Wayne County is was known for its weavers up until the Civil War, coverlet weavers. But Overbeck's, began in 1911. So Mr. Grant, of course, and his late wife Barbara had collected Overbeck art pottery, and as a banker and small town banker and moving around and helping consolidate banks in what became Lake City Bank. I mean, he spent 60 years or better finding Overbeck pieces, and in some cases he would buy lots of them. I mean, in terms of a number of pieces at one sale. And he was there, I think, in the 1970s and saw John Nixon's estate selling things, as was Jerry and Phyllis Mathias, who lived in the Overbeck home and recently donated it to the Wayne County Historical Society. So the Overbecks, there's a certain amount of myth surrounding them too. Nobody knows for sure how many pieces they made. The estimate might be as many as 10,000.
Oh, wow.
But no one knows, because Mary Frances, last sister out, who died in 1955, before she passed away, she threw all of the Overbeck's family records into a fireplace in the middle of the summer.
Oh, no.
And the mailman reported this to the local town folk, that Mary's must be going a little bit off the edge, because here it is, steamy hot.
Yeah.
And yes, so we have in the Overbeck collection one shelf of unique little characterizations, caricatures. Mary Frances Overbeck, the youngest sister, she was accredited with doing 80% of the figurines. All the figurines were handmade. They practiced or looked at a mold, and we have one example of a mold cast, but they didn't like that because the arts and craft motto was it was all done by hand. Unique, beautiful, often one of a kind. It would be a pair if it were a pair of vases or a pair of candlesticks. So the figurines were referred to as the humor of the kiln.
Okay.
And so I guess Mary Frances wasn't against lampooning some of the local celebrities, including a kind of a gregarious-looking bartender that he was called, no name. But One name was Mr. Jane, or Jan, Jahn, who was the high school conductor of the band.
Mm-hmm.
He appears, and someone's dog, Skipper. And there was a famous sulky horse because Wayne County was where a lot of sulky horses were trained, and so the Super G. So we have one of those, and supposedly one of Ida Overbeck, the oldest of the 6 sisters, her husband pushing a wheelbarrow.
Okay.
And then finally, and the one I was getting at there was she lampooned some different people, and so the bartender is one example of that. And other than local personalities, the mailman. And he didn't come with a name, but it was the mailman, their local mailman, who discovered Mary Frances burning all the records in the heat of a summer with the fireplace roaring. And she said, quote, "This is the family business and no one else needs to know about this."
Oh, wow.
So it only fueled the myth of the Overbecks,
Yeah.
of how many and what was their glaze formulas and all that. And we have examples of some of those kinds of things, but nothing ever definitively written other than Kathleen Postal's book, which was published in 1978 and reissued 20 years later by the Indiana Historical Society about the Overbeck. It's kind of like the Overbeck Bible.
Okay.
So the Overbecks are just really, that's a area that's ripe for reevaluation, reorganization, even the Postal book. And of course, I've read it at least 6 times. And Dr. Stephen Conant comes along and donates a Overbeck painting. And he said, "This is by Mary Frances or Margaret Overbeck." And I said, "Well, M.F. Overbeck, that always stood." And they were pretty standard in their ciphers on the bottom of the ceramic pieces. It would say OBK, and it might say EH, which means Elizabeth threw the form. She was the only sister that could throw clay on a wheel, a very primitive kick wheel that they motorized, and they fired everything in an old, very simple fuel oil kiln. So EH would stand for Hannah, who would have done the design. And usually that design was taken from some botanical study and then more or less abstracted. They had been used to doing that in the china plate patterns that they became, recognized for. So that's just an example. And sometimes it would be EM or EFMF, which was Mary Frances. Very rare, because Margaret Overbeck passed away the year the pottery was started in 1911, after she got them all stirred up to do this project, this endeavor. Then all of a sudden, she was ailing because of some accident she suffered in Chicago the previous year, about 4 months earlier, in an auto accident. So consequently, the figurines, we have a lot of figurines, and we also think, and I say we, collectively, whoever we are to talk about Overbecks, we think that during the World's Fair, the Overbeck won first prize in crafts, and they were displayed in the Indiana Pavilion, which is now famous or infamous for the murals that were, I think, taken down at IU in the auditorium that also Thomas Hart Benton had painted and included the Ku Klux Klan.
Oh my goodness.
So of late, those were not deemed as politically correct, but that was part of the 1930-33 Century of Progress. So there are considered 3 great tea sets created, each one unique. And the museum has 2 of those, thanks to Mr. Grant.
Oh, nice.
And one of them is the award-winning piece. And I found later a ticket and a program at 2 different estate sales for that 1933 Century of Progress. So I have those displayed next to the Overbeck. I think it's called the Martindale tea set, because
Okay.
Mr. Martindale had commissioned the two sisters that were left, and then they borrowed it to put on display. They felt pretty good about it, and then it won first prize.
Wow.
So there's a lot of stories and lore that go along with the Overbecks, and some of that, of course, I gleaned from Mr. Grant himself, spending hours, days, years on the road, finding and searching and acquiring, and then reading the postal book over and over. And then, as I started to mention, that Dr. Koenig comes along with a painting, and it's signed M.F. Overbeck. And he thought, the auction house said to him that this was Margaret Overbeck. And I said, well, usually M.F. stands for Mary Frances. And lo and behold, Randy, the then assistant curator, opens that book up and says, here it is.
Oh, wow.
And it clearly states it's Mary Frances Overbeck. So that was, things sometimes get misconstrued. And of course, as we know, even when we're researching on the internet, we have to compare and contrast, and sometimes go to books.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. Yeah, that's where I've gotten a lot of Emma's information, is finding her as Anna Bach in Dr. Simon Bronner's book called, I forget what the book is called off the top of my head, but she asked for a pseudonym, and it was created as Anna Bach. So
that's interesting, because one of our paintings is called the Bach Farm.
Oh.
We'll have to go back and look at that more closely. Now, I didn't realize that.
Yeah.
But you're speaking of the professor who was the head of the then called Mathers Museum. It was an ethnographic museum at IU.
Yes.
And I never knew what the connection, but that was her first museum exhibit.
Yeah.
And then after that, we were the first art museum exhibit that recognized her as, I guess, as an artist in an art museum.
Yeah.
He must have been intrigued by the whole cultural connection with the Amish or Old Order Mennonite community.
he his book is like Folklore Life or something like that. I can email you the title. But in connecting with him and asking him questions, cold emailing him, being like, "Hi,
Right.
I have a Emma Schrock collection. I know that you knew her." He graciously gave us a book. Getting him down, he gave us a book. So it's really interesting that her pieces and learning more about her. Yeah. So finding him and his book gave us a lot of insight to Emma, and actually getting to talk to him and meeting him through Zoom was also really cool.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm looking now, Martha, and it says Blockson. Blockson
Oh, okay.
Farm Scene. Blockson. And I asked someone about the Blockson Farm, and I think it was Professor Irvin Beck mentioned that would have been a farm in Lancaster County, the few trips that Emma made there.
Oh, yeah.
And so, yeah, not Bach, but Blockson. So,
Oh, okay. Yeah, I have no idea where she came up with Anna Bach, and none of her family members know, but it's just really, really interesting that she chose that. And we have, there are pictures of like some of the paintings, and we recently acquired some of the paintings that are in the book. So
wonderful.
yeah, we have, I think the Blosser Church we just acquired. And then I think we acquired that in February, and Awaiting the Mail also was acquired.
I think some of our more unique titles, Guy Bard's Bridge, I mentioned earlier, New Paris in 1920, Blockson Farm Scene, and then the rest of ours tend to be the typical titles, Moyer Sugar Camp, Fall Scene with Buggy, Beautiful Snow, those kind of things. The Family Carriage, The Company is Going Home, and that one is dated 1965.
Okay.
And we think that The Family Carriage is about that because Mr. Zellers, who purchased these, the former used car salesman, he bought them all at the same time. So we gave them the circa date of 1965, but one of them is actually in near her name. So
Okay.
that's why we guess, well, we have at least these 5 pieces from 1965 as early works
Yeah.
based on his information. The Guy Bard's Bridge and the New Paris in 1920, those were purchased. Oh, A Scene from My Windows is sort of a unique piece. And the couple from Chicago who had bought these, obviously when they were visiting either the Pletcher Village, this is 1971, they knew for sure that they purchased New Paris in 1920 and 1971. And the other, they said, well, we came back in subsequent years, and so the others are around 1975, so in that framework of time.
Yeah.
So those move from our 1979 paintings, some earlier works, and then that moves right into the 80s up until I think the latest piece we have is 1980, dated 1989.
Oh, okay.
86, 87. Don't see any from 88, but 89 is the last, and then she passed away in 91.
Yeah, 91. We actually have a painting from February of 1991 that is unfinished.
Maybe that's the one I saw in the estate sale then.
I don't know. It's a pink room with a... It was supposed to... I think it even has a title. I want to say it was like Sleeping at Grandma's or Sleeping at Grandmother's. And so that... Our first piece that we have of hers from 1965, and then that final piece, they're very close together in the gallery.
Yes. Well, then that's a full spectrum, full timeline.
Yeah.
Well, very good.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Brian, for allowing me to come and sit down with you and talk shop.
Yes. Well, it's always a pleasure to tell stories and to share stories. So, and with someone as interesting as Emma Schrock and a personality that she was for Elkhart County.
Yeah.
And our two institutions trying to preserve her memory. That's very gratifying. Thank you, Martha, for inviting me.
Yeah. Well, thank you again. Well, that's all that I have for this episode. A special thank you for Brian for sitting down with me. And next month, I'll have Dr. Mark Hutzel on the podcast, and we'll talk about chiropractors and its history and their history in Napanee. But before you go, make sure to subscribe to this podcast, hit like, or leave us a comment.